Let me tell you about the game franchise. A game franchise so unique within its design that deserves a lot of credit, but yet it still remains prone to end up on possibly the second page on Google search after 10 years. A game franchise developed by the talented Clay Entertainment and pushed to the shelves by EA, aka the people that think that the way they implement loot boxes in video games is quite ethical.
I think the way we've implemented our FIFA Ultimate Team packs is ethical.
Okay. A game franchise that they hope one day will receive another sequel, so it can achieve its full potential. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Shank series. As I mentioned in other words at the beginning of the video, I described this series as having a great potential, and I think the key potential holder here is the first game. This is because despite it being a really solid game, it has, a great room for improvement. But first of all, let's talk why is the game so good overall, the first game, to be exact. By entering the world of gaming with its initial release date on 24th of August 2010, the unique feature that Shank puts on the table as a game from the side-scrolling beat-em-up genre is primarily its combat, along with its cartoony animations and looks that mix themselves up to create a satisfying and at the same time gory experience. Gory is actually a keyword here, because first, some of you need to have a decent stomach for this game, and at least in my opinion, because I consider myself kinda desensitized towards blood and guts, so to speak. I mean, when I see them on a screen, like this video game, or a movie, you get the idea. And secondly, because the gore and twisted nature of this game allow for satisfying combat and gameplay. It is just more impactful in terms of satisfaction to grab an enemy instead of just shooting him in the face. You can chase on him in the chest or just put a grenade in his mouth so it explodes. Yeah, it's just that ridiculous, this game is insane, it's bananas, okay? And there is a reason for it, being so crazy, because the game has a whole Tarantino film touch to it, and this is present in the brutality, the story, and the overuse of gore. Even the developers say themselves that Shank is an ode to Double Dragon with a Tarantino film feel to it. But let's get more in depth with the gameplay. Here the arsenal is a key element. It consists of a light weapon, which are only the Shank knives of Shank, which will always be used so you can deal rapid damage to enemies with the ability to quickly dodge other incoming enemies, which will happen slower if you're using the heavy weapons like the chainsaw, the weapon that you used most of the time, the machete, which will be equally used as the chainsaw when dealing with smaller enemies, so you can more easily take them out by juggling them. Katana, which is kind of stiff in my and maybe more people's opinion, because it's a katana and it should be cool, but it's fucking useless. Okay. I kinda got enraged for a sec. and the chains, which I would say you wouldn't use that much, but at least they are more useful than the katana, in my opinion. The ranged weapons are Shank's iconic double pistols, shotgun, which is really useful for taking out smaller enemies because of the knockback that it has, and the Uzi, wow, the Uzi just f***ing useless, dude. I don't know what to tell you, like, they might have as well put a water gun instead of this uncontrollable massive gun, and uncomfortable as well, like, man, this not how you design a weapon in a weapon game. But anyway, this combination of cool and some trash weapons and the combat mechanics in the game makes for a very nice gameplay. I just mean, like, this, look at this, this is what Shank is, a definition of one of the greatest combat systems in the history of video games. The game forces you to be fast in the execution of your actions, and just like this, it adapts you to switch in between weapons constantly, so you can generate as much damage as possible, so you can avoid getting hit at the same time by a pathetic small thug or a juggernaut like Big Boy. Yeah, that's literally the end game, like, go figure. I don't know, it's funny, you know, it brings me back. I don't know where it brings me, but it's just funny as shit, dude. Big Boy. But anyway, it is just so satisfying to freaking bounce on a guy, knife the bitch a couple of times, chainsaw him before you fully finish your Shank combo, and maybe if there are incoming enemies, just freaking dodge their attacks and shoot them, both by wielding your pistols across your body, so you can shoot them from the front and the back. Like, it's insane. And you know, when I mention the chainsaw and the other brutal stuff, you know, I might sound like a madman, but you know, like, it's just, you know, satisfying. I don't know what to tell you, but you know, oh, and don't let me get started on the fun in co-op, where you can fucking toss enemies with your body and freaking shoving big enemies if one of your friends grabs them, so you can finish them off, or bring the same crazy combos. But this time it's double the fun, because it's co-op, baby, you know, and we're all about that socializing. Of course, if you have friends. If you don't have friends, I don't know what to tell you, like, get some friends. Don't be like me. Forever alone, you know. At least I got one friend. Where do you think I got all this co-op footage? But anyway, I'm here trying to put Shank's brilliant combat into words, so I can just compress it down to a single word. Breathtaking. It is indeed that great. But of course, sometimes it comes with its flaws, which is, you know, nothing's perfect in life. Most of these flaws that consist of sometimes the animations have a little bit of latency. After you press a button to attack, which in case of a game like Shank, that is dependent on fast reactions, can get you killed. Sometimes, not always. And also another thing that is kind of linked to the combat, or rather the gameplay as a whole, are particular controls overlapping. This only happens in the cases of grabbing health / the killer, because the health is really a bot of the killer, you know, in the game, so, you know. Or when reviving your friend in co-op mode. The button that is supposed to be used for, you know, using your Shank knives is used as a use button as well, which is a big no-no, especially during boss battles when you fight the boss and you accidentally consume all your health. But you know, so I can make the game justice, I would say that this is kind of fixed in the most latest version of the game, but unfortunately I didn't have the wish to play it because some of the cutscenes were missing, which basically kills the experience and the top of the game. So I'm basically currently reviewing the classic version of the game, so take a note of that. And another thing that is linked to the game as a whole and to the sweet gameplay is that you kinda won't get enough of it, because the game is kinda short. Because when I managed to finish both the single player and co-op modes, according to Steam, I played 5 to 6 hours of the game. But when I look at the in-game timer that is displayed at the end of the single player and co-op campaigns, I completed the single player campaign in 2 hours, 15 minutes and 47 seconds, and the co-op one for 1 hour, 46 minutes and 55 seconds. Yeah, it's a short time, which kinda sucks, and it's a letdown for the game in a way. But you know, for me personally, I was satisfied with my experience, and I'm kinda willing to forgive this to indie developers like Clay, but not also because they're indie, but because I feel like despite the raw length, you get a full experience with the game. Does it have replay value, you might ask? Well, it kinda does, and it stretches to replaying the whole game on hard difficulty for the hard difficulty achievement, because you probably get this as the last achievement, since the others are pretty easy, and you can pretty much get them by completing the single player and co-op campaign. And also, you can just replay it for fun, because in my opinion, this is a cute little game, so to speak, you know, with a great combat system and a great tone, which presents a really linear story in a pretty dramatic way, which is good. For the price of £7.19, this is what you're getting, and I think it's worth it, because it is an experience that is really unique. You can get it during sales if you want for £1.19, if you don't have the deep pockets, you know, like me. Okay, now we're getting a little sidetracked here, so let's talk about the enemies of the game. Well, you know, the enemies, you know, they're kind of goofy in terms of their looks. You know, this doesn't stem that from their models like Shank's, but rather than how they're drawn. Cause Shank and Falcon, you know, the character from the co-op mode, which is Shank's partner, look good, and all the bosses in the game as well, but the normal enemies just don't seem fit in this to this world, you know. Probably their design was by intention, which is something I can swallow, but anyway, let's talk about all the enemies. One thing you need to know, they do their job as bad guys and are satisfying to kill. I cannot say their variety in terms of mechanical design is big, because not many enemies with unique movesets and even weapons are introduced that often. Now, I'm saying this in comparison to the sequel, where the enemy variety is pretty damn good. Like, seriously, even the bosses are better, and speaking of bosses, Shank One's bosses are, you know, okay. I think they're fair enough in terms of patterns, but in terms of difficulty, most of them you can find pretty easy if you're playing on normal difficulty on single player. Some of them are kinda challenging, but the co-op bosses are actually better balanced, if I say so. They are way more challenging, but yet more satisfying to finish off because of that. One thing I don't like about the bosses is how the big in size bosses are real big sons of bitches. Their size is freaking gigantic. It is just like so exaggerated to the point where seeing them so every time, it kinda shows a lack of creativity. Kinda. They do try to be unique, but some of their design choices kinda make them feel the same, which is an issue, but overall it doesn't devalue them, and therefore I can say that these bad boys are pretty enjoyable to fight despite the missteps in their design. But anyway, by clearing these missteps of the game's combat and enemies and length, let's move on to the other elements of the game, which include the visual style, which looks great, especially the lighting present in some of the levels of the game. The animations are great, making the combat itself more satisfying. An example is the school boss fight, where me and my buddy Chang, aka Mr. Wei, aka Mr. Please don't swear that much, because it is a pain to edit out all the cuss parts of the video.
It's not next level bullshit. This guy's a piece of shit. Holy shit.
We're fighting the SWAT boss in co-op, and whenever we managed to make him disabled with our attacks, we were able to grab him, tase him with his own taser, which is freaking cool, and it displays a real great flashy animation. Another example is the boss battle with Angelo, where when Angelo gets grabbed, Shank proceeds to shoot him multiple times in a very cool way. Overall, the animations are pretty good. You know, they're freaking amazing. But on the other side of the visual spectrum comes the background of the actual levels, which for sure looks great for the most part. You know, I'm not saying for the most part, because I try to shoot the game, but sometimes some stuff in the background of the game look kind of not top quality resolution, so to speak. Don't have as much depth, which is not that big of a deal, maybe, since it doesn't bother me that much. And hey, it's freaking, like, you know, 2D features in a 2D game, so, you know, I guess I'm just bullying the game at this point, like I was bullied at 6th grade. I think I'm getting a bit personal here. So let's switch on, you know, to the other thing that I can mention about the backdrop of the levels, is that it sometimes feels like that the characters within the game and the backdrop itself don't feel like they're from the same animated realm. because you get these carefully clothed thugs and your boy Shank with his contrasting model with vibrant grey and his red bandana on backdrops that are really dark and yellow, and so out of the tone of the characters' models, the boys and girls just don't blend in. You know what I'm saying? But of course, this isn't an issue throughout the whole game necessary. These out-of-tune visuals can be spotted mostly during the first levels of the single-player campaign. The battle with Angelo, the final levels that are approaching the battle with Cesar, kinda during the final battle of the co-op campaign, but for the rest of the game, the visuals, like, breathtaking. Oh, and don't get me started on the soundtrack, because it is just purely a masterpiece. The music in the games makes the experience much better, and that's a fact. Like, freaking punius, like, if you ask me. It perfectly matches the tone of the game and its specific setting, while fighting thugs in the most brutal ways, and at the same time hear one of the most striking notes that an OST will ever achieve in history. The feeling becomes truly cathartic. Now, I'm not saying that the soundtrack is, here is on the level like Doom in terms of musical genius and application in the game, but what I'm saying is that the composers, Vincent DeVera and Jason Garner, truly know how music in video games works. Or rather, music as a whole, because the soundtrack is such a joy to listen to that it is likely that you'll pick it up and listen to it even when you are not playing the game, as a part of your playlist, because it is so good. That's more epic than Epic Games. That's really big epic, More epic than Epic Games? This means more epic than Fortnite? Question mark? I don't know. Maybe. But anyway. Now, since word came about epicness, let's talk about the story. Overall, for this one, I don't think I will be spoiling anything major about it, since it is a linear story and pretty predictable, But let me tell you about it. It is your generic man's girl gets killed and he seeks revenge and finally manages to find all the bad people and kill them type of story. It is the story of Shank, an ex-mob that was working for his boss Cesar, until Cesar decides to teach Shank a permanent lesson due to him being displeased with Shank killing one of his own men, more specifically Cesar's personal bodyguard that goes by the name of Rudy, so that he can protect his girlfriend Eva. Because of what Shank has done, Cesar decides to test him, so he can prove his loyalty by making Shank himself kill his own girlfriend, which of course your man cannot do, and decides to leave Cesar's organization. Despite this only being a test of loyalty, Cesar decides to send a couple of people, which go by the name of the Butcher, a wrestler that used to have previously issues with Cesar, Cassandra, a stripper that used to work with Cesar, and Angelo, Cesar's brother. These three bad boys, or rather two bad boys and one bad girl, Harry, follow Shank where he kinda accidentally led them to his girlfriend, where they managed to kill her and try to kill him. But surprise, surprise, bitches, 7 years later he's back from the dead and is ready to slay some and bad people, and the bad people that were involved in the murder of his girlfriend. It is pretty straightforward, but at the same time I really enjoy it. And this is definitely by design. The voice acting plays a huge role and it's performed really well, for the most part. All of the voice actors make these characters seem believable and unique, and they also give you feeling that you've known them for a much longer time rather than just for a couple of seconds of quick introduction with flashbacks. I can say that I have a little issue sometimes with the voice acting, because when the characters sometimes speak occasionally, you really hear gibberish like, this.
She saw me shoot the deputy mayor. The witnesses. The witnesses.
Yeah, and at this point, I don't know, what's the reason for these? Maybe the actors didn't, have time for retakes or something, or just, it is just kind of a little bit based on the audio, I don't know. It's an annoying small issue, but still voice acting, very nice for the majority of the game. Furthermore, the music and the cutscenes just mix up and create a good 2D cinematic experience. It is evident that a lot of care was put into these. Overall, the story is not a marvel in terms of its content, but rather an honorable mention in terms of its absolutely great execution. Most of the characters hold up pretty well, and especially Shank, who is supposed to be this badass that doesn't give a fuck, like the Doom guy of the 2D platform genre. He's supposed to be this, and he is because of the game's great presentation. Also because of this presentation, the ending, yet again, is cathartic. It is a cathartic experience, and because of that I am not going to spoil it, since it is one of the best endings I've seen for a game. It really makes me feel relieved the way the character is. It is just that greatly presented. Overall, the gameplay, visuals, soundtrack, story, and its presentation of the first game are something that's unique, but still leaves a fair amount of room for improvement. It is a great experience overall, despite its missteps. So this is why I'm giving this bad boy a 7 out of 10. It is just that great. And now, let's begin with the sequel. In order to initially define Shank 2's structure in comparison with the first game, only 4 words can be used to describe this game. Bigger, better, faster, stronger. Shank 2 takes every misstep that was present in the first game and improves upon it, and also introduces some new elements. Initially, the most noticeable thing about the game is the improved animations. While the first game's animations were a decent joy to look at, while comparing them to the second game, they literally look like garbage, dude, like trash, you know? Like trash, man, okay? It's freaking ridiculous. The second game's animations are faster and smoother and more responsive, so to say, because the latency that was a little bit present in the first game is now missing, which makes the combat more solid. And if you die in combat and you think you died because of the controls, well, you're going to be dying to yourself, since it will be your fault, since the latency it is like really non-existent. Talking about improved animations, the sequel introduces the counter-attack mechanic, where if an exclamation mark pops up over an enemy's head during combat, you can grab them and counter them, which will result in their immediate death or just a lot of damage being dealt in case of the larger enemies. And these counters are really cool, like they refresh the gameplay so freaking much, and are kinda constantly introduce more and more in terms of their variety, which is really cool. And an example of how they are so entertaining is that literally if an enemy with a baseball bat tries to swing at you and you counter them by grabbing them, Shank will shove the baseball bat in their mouth and just kick it so their head freaking explodes. Like, what? This gross, but you know, it's insane. And if you counter an enemy with a machete, Shank will shove them in front of him, you know, and stab them once with his shank knives and freaking put the machete through their chest. And talking about the other animation, the pistol counterattack, Shank will literally freaking position the gunner's arm to the head and put the trigger so they can shoot their own head off. Like, it is freaking amazing. And a little bit of, you know, a side note that female characters introduced into the game, like Karina, which is Shank's sister. In terms of the other characters, they are more like skins that you can play with. The female characters, as I said, are different and have different animations, which I find them more cool than the ones of the male characters, because they're kinda like more aggressive, you know. I mean, I guess that's a win-win for women, so power to the women. Feminists are not gonna be angry, God bless. Oh my god. It's God bless. Thank you. You know, like, for example, look at me trying to do a full Shank knife combo with Karina. And like, look what this crazy bit does, dude. Like, he rips the whole guy apart. Like, look at this aggression. Look, it's freaking cool, dude. You know, and this is what Shank is about. And you know, it's freaking insane. And also the animations are kinda more acrobatic, so to speak, as you can see, which is really, you know, cool. Anyway, let's get to the weapons. The weapons in Shank 2 remain the same for the majority of the game, except for the introduction of the scythe, hammer, throwing knives, revolver, Molotovs, and the explosive mines. The new additions are actually pretty good in terms of how they deal and what way they distribute damage, and will be used equally with the other weapons. For the old part of the arsenal, the machetes, katana, chainsaw, pistols, shotgun, and grenades, they remain solid. In terms of the katana, it actually doesn't remain, but rather becomes solid, and thank God for that. It is not stiff like the one from the first game, but it is actually a joy to play with it. And unfortunate thing about the arsenal is how it is structured. This involves its accessibility, which means that in the first game you could swap between all weapons midway through the combat, but here if you want to swap something you need to go to the main menu first, press change loadout and then swap the weapons, which is moronic, and I don't know why it's done this way. Another limitation is that if you want to play with the katana for the whole of the campaign, the story mode, well, you can't, because only the female characters have the katana and the scythe, and also the revolver and the Uzi, and you have only one level to play with Kurina, the female character, which is a big letdown despite the cool animation and combos that you can do with this piece of the sword. You just can't get enough of it from the campaign. As I mentioned, the Uzi, it's still a piece of shit now, don't use it, it's just like, just forget it. And I think I forgot to mention is that now you have the ability to pick up weapons, which most commonly are dropped from enemies, and you can use them to beat the shit out of other enemies, and also you can pick up different, objects which you can beat the enemy with again and again, and you can throw them, like throw big vases, which is pretty fun, and sinks, and freaking sinks, and this stuff is really cool. I don't know what to tell you, it's evolution gameplay. But and also there are turret sections, which are fine, and also switches for traps, which are fine. Overall, I'm pleased with the arsenal and the other stuff that you can use as a weapon and interact with, so to speak. And talking briefly about what the game offers as game modes, it has a single player campaign which basically lets you play through the story, and a co-op survival mode which is pretty great fun with friends, and kinda a little bit if you play it alone, but play it with friends, don't be alone or lose it. Yeah, so the campaign, I can say that really delivers big time compared to the first game due to the smooth and satisfying combat. In terms of length, it's kinda 3 hours 45 minutes long, at least for me, because I played the first 6 levels on hard difficulty, but then I pushed it out on the 7th one because I was disgusted due to its checkpoints, which was like freaking terrible, dude. Like look at this, I'm like over midway to the level and it sends me back to the freaking start point, and this wasn't the same in the freaking previous levels, which tilted me and I just couldn't do it, and I switched for the 7th and the 8th level to normal mode so I can complete the game, because I just couldn't be bothered on hard mode, man. I don't know what to say. So technically, if you play the game only on normal, it's going to be shorter than 3 hours and 45 minutes if you have my amazing skills. And if you play it on hard mode, it's going to be longer than 3 hours and 45 minutes if you have my amazing skills. But despite this reasonably short but satisfying length, there is a ton of replayability due to the tons of achievements that the game offers, and also the game has leaderboards for your score depending on the combos and moves performed. Leaderboards which nobody cares about, because the game is more dead than Mortal Kombat the Complete Edition, which is really sad, and I wish it's not this way, but And for co-op, let's talk about it, because this is truly a gem of the game. The mode is survival, in which you really have to survive waves of enemies, which increase their difficulty as they move on to the next wave. Throughout these waves, you face almost every enemy that the game has to offer, and even some extra ones that are unique to the mode, like the bosses, the zombies and the bombers. And the bombers, they have the special objective to plant bombs on the bomb sites, or the so-called supply stations, because we here on this channel are technical intelligence, and if these bad boys plant a bomb on a station, you need to quickly defuse it, since if the bombers manage to destroy all the stations, then that's game over for you, like my life. You can play on 3 maps, and every map has some type of unique trap. Down on a farm is basically a farm, and its trap is Grinder, which in my opinion is just freaking brain dead. A bomb church, which is a church which has fire traps, which are fair enough and balanced. And I'm on a boat where you really are on the boat. Never thought of that. And the traps are harpoon guns, which are pretty fun and useful when you have a friend to play with. In the mode you can play as Shank and Karina, but also the skins of these characters, which are basically different characters, which actually have meaningful stats. Like some of them have less health but more ranged damage, like Bubbles, plus 50% Shank damage like Sunshine, and 50% bonus at the sound speed like the Defender. These stats are a good introduction, but I feel like the original characters of the game, Shank and Karina, should have, received a much more special stat rather than like plus 10% health. I don't know, maybe it makes sense to be like this since they are unlocked straight away, but if they had something more unique, it still wouldn't hurt. In terms of pure heat-filled gameplay, the mode is just an adrenaline rush as the waves progress. A lot of the late waves are challenging, especially during after wave 20, but it is fair, One of the challenges comes from a little bit of strategic thinking, I know, right, The reason is because of the shop system in the game mode, where you can buy certain items from the money/gold that enemies drop and from the combos you perform. These items can be weapons like the minigun, health/killer, one of the most important things, an automatic turret, a boar to knock enemies around, and a decoy, which is basically me, a 6th grade, a really bullyable person that serves as a punching bag for the enemies so they can be distracted while you are beating other enemies or just defusing a bomb. Pretty complicated, right? Nah, just joking. It's just thrilling and freaking hard for the most part, which is what makes this co-op mode so great, and it is another reason why you would revisit this game a lot of times, because the combat is pure and mixed up with the insane challenge and structure of survival mode, and just throw in another person into the action. This mode will be one of these lone bad boys in your Steam library that you don't play much, but get back into from time to time, because you're sick of investing yet another 100 hours in CSGO and League of Legends, and you just want to spend some quality time with the boys or girls playing co-op survival mode, because for good time's sake and good gameplay. That is, of course, if they are not oblivious to what a good game is, and if they even have the game in the first place, because literally almost nobody has the game in the first place. Yes, so basically, single player and co-op modes, very nice, will suck up your time big time. Now, let's talk about the design of the enemies. Unlike the first game, they look the way that they should. They indeed fit this fictional world in terms of their visual models and don't seem out of place like the first game. They are also more interesting mechanically speaking. The game is constantly trying to introduce newer and newer types of enemies, or rather mostly kind of the same enemies but with different types of weapons, which is not a problem, but it's something good, since these differently equipped enemies will introduce you with a different way to fight them with, and also will introduce other cool looking counter-attack animations. The enemies are pretty great, and even the bosses, which despite some of them being the big buff stereotypical boys, are really interesting to fight with because of the way more improved patterns and animations compared to the first game. An issue that I have though with the boss battles is how when you disable a boss and grab them to deal a lot of damage to them, like the first game. Now in the sequel, the combo just skips to a cutscene where Shank or Karina are shown how they beat the boss for this sequence, which is I find dumb since the game's improved visuals and animations. It would have been great to see a great flash animation like in the first game, but instead only a cutscene is displayed, which is a letdown. But for the rest of the boss fights, they are really entertaining, and fair in terms of what difficulty you're playing on. If we are talking about the design of all character models, they now blend in with the environment, and they seem that they're actually part from this animated world, or realm as I called it before. The colors of their models and the backdrop match perfectly. In terms of backdrop of the levels, they look great, as well as the level design itself plays out in a much more better and improved way. And also, again, the backdrops look great, match, the characters as I said, but also feel like more high res. And also there's a little bit of more depth and a little bit of, feel of interactivity with them. Especially when you can pick up objects, so it's pretty good. But let's talk about this. The soundtrack, again, strikes the perfect notes that match the game's tone. it still shares the same epicness as the first game, but something that is kinda missing from the second game that the first game had is the dramatic tone of the story, which kinda makes me not want to care that much about it. In contrast to the first game, the cutscenes are really dry and the voice acting is really off as well, as well as the writing, which you can't be bothered to follow because of the awful presentation. In order to give you a summary of the story, it is about our protagonist Shank, your boy Shank, returning to his hometown only to witness how it is being overtaken by the militia under the command of General Magnus, who is basically tyrannical, and therefore a rebellion has started against. But along with his tyranny, the man is also ill. He needs a heart transplant, specifically from Shank's mom. And you know how the story goes on. He's trying to save his mom, which, spoiler alert, she eventually dies, and then he goes to kill Magnus, and then at the end. And that's it. I might have forgiven the story if it was presented well as the first game, but it wasn't. The cutscenes feel rushed, as if Clay didn't care that much, but if they didn't care about any lore, why did they even bother to put collectible intel, which is basically lore? Why did they do that in the first place? I really don't know. The story in this game is a big letdown, but due to the game's other features, this disappointment, I think it's overshadowed. But I am still annoyed with the story bit, since I feel like they were a big waste of potential, which wasn't the case of the first game. But you know, despite that, this bad boy deserves an 8 out of 10 for me. It is just like a marvel, something really great, a thrilling experience. It is something really personal to me, and you might say I'm a little bit biased, but I think a lot of people should try out these games, even though I have big no audience. But you know, someday, maybe if a lot of people find this video, I hope they for sure try at least the second game, because it's such a masterpiece. And you know, replaying these games was a journey for me. Literally one of my best moments in game. I feel real joy, but at the same time sadness, because if you didn't realize, at the end of the day no one plays Shank 1 and 2, and they really don't know what the reason is. The game offers great combat, art style and presentation, and it just bugs my mind for why no one would give these bad boys a chance. This is why I decided to make these reviews, this double review, so to say, as a love letter to these games, one that is just a normal exploration of them. But it is an exploration which is really enough to show to the world what talent Clay Entertainment possess. Sure, they might now be glorified with Don't Starve and other of their new hot games, but I think credit should always be given where it's due, and in terms of the Shank series, it's overdue. This series is a vessel of potential. The second game learned from the first game and made the experience greater, but still the sequel lacks some stuff that are achievable to be added in the third game. But because of its low initial and now present day popularity, this masterpiece is stuck in a curse not to evolve into something greater under the title Shank 3, with more modes like PvP, customizable characters, longer single player and more richer, well presented and complex story, but rather a vessel of unused